Okay, Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can break the ice. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Remley, and I'm an associate professor, and I in the area of family and consumer sciences, and I am what they call an extension field specialist. And my area is also food, nutrition, and wellness. I've been working with extension now, I'd say for about 20 years, about 3 years in Missouri, and then almost about 17 years here in Ohio. A lot of my work occurs at the intersection of chronic disease and food insecurity, like diabetes. We see higher rates of diabetes, for example, in food insecure populations. And it kind of seems a little paradoxical, but if you think about, what types of foods are available in communities, especially in communities where people are disadvantaged, think about what's available in, say, food pantries and those types of things. So I do work a lot with food pantries and help them transition to a choice model that uses the My Plate food groups. And so it's kind of a policy systems and environmental change where people learn about the food groups as they choose. We promote My Plate, try to integrate nutrition education. So we're trying to address both food insecurity and also help people with chronic disease like diabetes. And so I went to Oregon and learned about a program called Heal Maps and saw utility in bringing this back to Ohio and trying to apply it in communities to help communities become healthier, improve their environments, to make healthier foods more accessible to people. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. I'm married, have 3 kids. One's a teenager going into college next year, and enjoy hiking and kayaking.
Glennon, do you want me to go next? And then you?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay, I'm Karima. I'm an Extension and Research Coordinator. I work for OSU Extension, and I'm housed in partnership with the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. Just background about me, I have a bachelor's degree in dietetics from the University of Kentucky. I've been with Extension for about 6 years now. Started out as an FNET program assistant in Greene County, just outside of in Xenia, outside of Dayton, teaching low-income, limited resource families how to eat healthy on a budget. During that time, I earned my master's in public health from OSU, and now I do research with food insecure families to hopefully influence policy systems and environment change through a few different community-based participatory research projects. The research projects I help manage and coordinate now are in collaboration with Kerwin and Glennon, and she'll talk more about Feast. And then Heal Maps, which Jan just talked about, and also a multi-state USDA NIFA grant called Voices for Food. And I'm also the co-chair of the Franklin County Local Food Policy Council. Thanks.
So hello, everybody. Dan and Karima and I are clearly not in the same location today, so we can't see what so my name is Glennon Sweeney. I'm a senior research associate at the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity here at The Ohio State University. Kirwan is an applied interdisciplinary research institute. And my work centers around kind of 2 broad topics, what I call community assessment and metropolitan change, or metropolitan neighborhood change, where I do a lot of work trying to understand the contemporary and historical structural drivers of inequality and kind of where is poverty moving to and why are those things happening. And then I also was originally hired full-time at Kirwan. I started there as a GRA. To run and build a food justice research program. And so that is what I've been doing largely in partnership with Dan Remley and Karima, who are here on the phone with us. Yeah, I have a bachelor's in geography and political science, a master's in city regional planning, and I'm also working on a PhD very, 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 very slowly here at Ohio State in the city and regional planning department. And I think we can get moving. And I also just want to let everyone know I have to teach today, so I will be getting off within the next 30 minutes or so. So if you have a question about anything I am saying, I strongly recommend you put it in the notes and ask it, before 12:35, 12:40, because I need to boogie downstairs and teach at that point. And so this is the agenda that you can see on your screen for what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to really go over the first couple points, and then Dan and Kareem are going to take over, and they can answer questions about anything I talk about as well. So FEAST, Food Mapping for Empowerment, Access, and Sustainable Transformation, is a community university collaborative. And so you can advance to the next slide. So we have partners from the university. We have a number of faculty partners, I think around 12 or 13 faculty partners from some pretty different departments. So we have some humanities folks, someone from comparative studies. We have some folks from the medical center, medical dietetics. We have some extension partners, people in community development, or I guess it's actually the leadership. What does ACEL stand for? I don't remember what it's for, but agricultural communications, community development, and then of course extension. We also have partners in city regional planning, partners in public affairs, social work, education and human ecology, and I might be missing a few, but that is not to diminish their value to our team. And then we also have a number of community partners, and they really kind of run the gamut. We actually work with a for-profit educational consulting firm. We work with the city and the county. We also work with a number of nonprofit and nonprofit religiously affiliated social service providers in our collaborative. So you can go to the next slide. And so FEAST is actually represents the merging of two distinct food mapping teams. And so in 2014, Dr. Michelle Kaiser in the College of Social Work led a team called the Food Mapping Team, and our goal was to map the food environment in 10 zip codes in Franklin County. And we did this by creating a rather lengthy assessment or survey that we administered in person and collected data and created community profiles. And then Dan came to Kerwin and he said, I need help with this HEAL Maps thing. I need particularly GIS help. And so we started playing with this participatory mapping approach and learned very quickly that it would have been nice to have the food mapping team data when we did some pilots for this. And so we recognizing that many of our FORC, and we were called FORC at the time, Food Opportunity Research Collaborative, doing the HEAL Maps work, realizing that many of us were actually food mapping team members, I called up Michelle and said, hey, what would you think of expanding your survey? Because then we could kind of have a holistic understanding of the food environment. So we spent last summer, so the summer of 2017, not this past summer, visioning. So we spent the summer having a series of meetings to kind of bring the two teams together, solidify what our research questions are, and come up with a mission and a vision. And so what you see on the screen here is our mission and vision. And they are very much influenced also by the local food action plan, because it had just come out then, and kind of what the city and county and Columbus are really looking to do with the food system, because we see them as critical partners in our work if we want to create this work. And I'll explain what it is we're creating. I'm not going to read these. I figure you've had enough time to read them while I talk if you really wanted to. And I believe this PowerPoint might be made available as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So what FEAST really asked ourselves is we said, so how do we create more equitable food environments at the community level? That is, how do we achieve food justice, right? How do we empower communities? And you can go to the next slide. This is going to be pretty quick also, just to warn you. Because at the aggregate, right, we know where things are, right? We can map all kinds of things. We can map where food deserts are. We can tell the location of things, right? But what we really wanted to understand, and you can go to the next slide now, is do we have the local data that we need to understand that intersection of place and identity, right? Do we understand the lived experience of food insecurity? It's one thing to put points on a map, but how do we know if those points are places where people are willing to go, right? Because we believe that that could be a game changer in the policy arena, informing about the lived experience. And we think it's something that's largely missing in the literature as well. So you can go to the next point. So what we did is we really merged the qualitative and quantitative approaches. So we have this assessment, right, which is largely quantitative. There are some qualitative questions in that as well, right? And then we merged this qualitative participatory mapping approach to really start to understand, well, what is the lived experience of food insecurity? How does it differ for different populations? And I'll get into that in a second. You can go to the next slide. So we asked ourselves, can we map the characteristics of our food and health environment? Can we expand that survey and really do something very similar? And so what we kind of hold ourselves up to, the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future created a really phenomenal food systems map for Maryland. And we want a database like that. We want it at the neighborhood level, right? Because when we go on the internet, when we go out and try to find health and food environment data, we want to know about obesity. We want to know about food insecurity, right? We can find this information, but we can find it at the county level. Franklin County is a big place, and there are a lot of different communities in Franklin County. And Franklin County is where the Ohio State University main campus is situated in the city of Columbus, Ohio. So, Columbus, Ohio has this 17.4% free and reduced lunch rate, but, we really question what that actually tells us about communities in Franklin County. What does that tell us about Wyland Park, a community adjacent to the Ohio State University that's undergoing gentrification and has struggled over time? What does it tell us about the Hilltop, an area that is relatively low income in Columbus? What does it tell us about Upper Arlington, a wealthy white suburb, right? That 17.4 doesn't really mean anything when we think about neighborhoods and communities. So can we create that neighborhood level database? Can we create something that is publicly accessible, interactive, and really gets to that neighborhood level? So that's what we're trying to do, and that's the question we're really trying to answer by expanding that survey. And you can go to the next one. And then, our second question is really, can understanding the lived experience of food insecurity lead to transformative policy solutions? So at Kirwan, we really focus on research that can lead to transformation, that can have an impact, right? And my personal goal is naturally to change the world, right? But we want to start with what we know and what's possible. And for me, Central Ohio is what I understand. So let's start here and see if we can understand the lived experience of food insecurity. Particularly, can we understand it in a couple key ways, right? How does the lived experience of food insecurity differ between urban and suburban and rural typologies, right, for communities? How is it the same? How does it not, does typology even matter? What about race and ethnicity and immigration status? What about the life cycle, right? Does the lived experience of food insecurity differ between children? Children experience food insecurity differently than their parents or their grandparents, right? What are those differences? And then even by level of food insecurity, right? Is there a real difference in lived experience if you're very low or low food insecure? And then, because we're working with families, we're very interested in the impact of the school year, right? When school is in session, how is your lived experience different than when it's not? And then finally, there's the benefit cycle, right? If my food stamps, say, are coming in on the 4th, I might be food secure on the 5th and the 6th and the 7th and the 8th and the 9th, right? But what am I like on the 3rd? What am I like on the 23rd, right? How does that lived experience change? And so we realized we would need to adapt the HEAL MAPS methodology to get at that for a number of reasons, and I'll get to that in a minute. You can go to the next slide. But I do want to kind of emphasize that what we're trying to build and what we've been building is really community-based participatory research, and it's on a number of levels, right? Because we start with our collaborative, with our community partners, but then we also engage community members on another level and kind of bring them into the research as experts and pay them. So I work at a university, and the thing that I really like to emphasize about community-based participatory research is it kind of knocks on its head the traditional view of knowledge within a university, right? Universities traditionally kind of think of themselves as the places or the centers where knowledge is created, right? And then we disseminate knowledge to the public. Community-based participatory research kind of questions the notion that some types of knowledge are more valuable than others, right? And that there are types of knowledges that don't have that PhD attached to them that can be equally as valid. There are types of expertise that are equally as valid as the kind of knowledge that we generate in the university. So community-based participatory research is really about co-creation of new knowledge, right? And so this definition here is just from W.K. Kellogg. I took it from them. You're welcome to use it as well, and I cited it down there. If you could go to the next slide, please. And so the other thing is that our work is really grounded in principle, what we call principled civic engagement. So the Kirwan Institute, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to create equitable and inclusive engagement spaces, and how to do research that is engaged research in a way that is respectful and aware of the people and the experiences that they've had that we're working with, right? And so all of our members, all of our FEAST team members, in our initial summer kind of coming together with the two teams, we all went through this civic engagement training that Kirwan does. My colleague Kip, who wrote this book actually, is the one who trained us all. And so those principles really guide how we think about and structure our engagements throughout this process, and even how we interact with each other sometimes. So you can go to the next slide. And so our methods, right? I don't need this slide. You can go to the next one. So is it still my turn, Karima?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Tell me when I need to stop talking, because I haven't been counting. Sorry.
Sure, it's after your toolbox.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yep.
So, you know, we kind of think of this as a giant food system assessment, but the survey in particular is really a food system assessment. This is where we're gathering the quantitative data that can feed into our database, right? And so that's the in-person administered, we also had it online, but the in-person survey, right? And if you want to reach populations that are harder to reach, doing it in person is kind of key. And we also, in the original survey, we oversampled vulnerable populations, and we will continue to do that as we expand. And so the survey has approximately 100 qualitative and quantitative questions in it. Most of them are quantitative, though there are some qualitative questions. And if you can go to the next slide, it kind of talks about what and so they kind of couch under these broad categories. So we ask a series of questions about food access, a series of questions about food patterns. We in the original survey, we did the short food insecurity or food security test at USDA. We're going to do the long form and as we expand, because we want them more detailed results. We have a section on health conditions. And so this is just self-reported health conditions in your household, neighborhood environment, and then background, participant background, right? So that we can talk about who it is that we surveyed. How representative is the population that we engaged with of the population in the city of Columbus, in their census tract, in their zip code. You can go to the next slide. And so our approach is kind of what we think of as a modified HEAL Maps approach. And so to kind of give you some background about HEAL Maps in general. So HEAL Maps was created at Oregon State University by a woman named Deborah John. And it's really, she kind of framed it as a quick and dirty needs assessment. And so it was really designed to assess rural obesogenic food environments. And it's a really great tool for doing that. We were really more interested, and HEAL Maps stands for Healthy Eating and Active Living, Mapping Attributes Using Participatory Photographic Surveys, or photographic, whatever order. But we did modify the approach somewhat significantly. And so the way that we do it is we identify community partners. They're generally already FEAST partners. We kind of set ourselves up so that the areas we're going to be engaging are areas where our partners already have skin in the game, because they're the areas they want that information about. So this kind of follows the traditional HEAL Maps approach, but does differ. And then we have a stakeholder meeting, and the purpose of this is really to bring forward the key movers and shakers in a community and let them know what we're doing, right? Because part of that is that they need to be aware that this issue exists in the community, and they might have resources that we could leverage as well. And then we work with our community partner to identify and recruit community researchers, and we train them. And when we train them, we also train them in our civic engagement skills. And you can go to the next slide. One thing we do differently is so in traditional HEAL Maps, they go out and they do their mapping. And so what they do is they take these Garmin devices, and you take pictures of And in our approach, you take pictures of barriers to and facilitators of food access. But we do some different things in our mapping. We also give people $20 to spend. And we ask them to spend the money when they go out and when they go to a place where they would normally get food. And so part of that is us trying to understand, well, what is the value of $20? Does it differ by community typology? Does it differ by level of food insecurity? Does it differ by the benefit cycle? Because we ask them to do this twice. And we're very strategic about the 2 times we ask them to do this. We ask them to do this once when school is in session and once when school isn't. And one of those times happens at the beginning of a month and the other one at the end of a month, so that we kind of get at that benefit cycle and at the cycle of the school year. And then after everyone's gone out and done this and collected, we're also in the process of building an application that can do this on a smart device that, you know, and they've taken the pictures of these barriers and facilitators and they're geocoded so we can upload their maps. We go and we print all the photos and then we ask people, so we take the youth separately, the adults separately, and the seniors separately, and we ask them to collectively, those 3 groups with the other people, so we have about five youth, 5 seniors, 5 adults. We ask them to collectively decide which photos best represent, you know, their collective experience accessing food in the community. And so they come up with, you know, up to 10 photos or so, maybe 15 at the most. Kids take way more photos. And then we kind of tell a story with that. And at the same time, we pull them out individually and we do ethnographic interviews. And so we kind of get at, well, you know, I looked at your route and it was really interesting to me because, you know, you went to corner store X, but on the way there, you walked past 2 other corner stores. You know, what was so special about corner store X? You know, why were you willing to walk further for that, or whatever the question might be? But you kind of get at what were their motivations, what were they thinking, what was the process they went through as they went on this journey. And so we take that information from the interviews and we code it, qualitative coding, and kind of come up with some themes. And so we kind of do 2 types of coding. We code for barriers and facilitators, right? We're trying to identify, well, what are the barriers? What are the issues that keep coming up and again and again? And then we also kind of do some grounded theory coding, really trying to get at what are the broader issues that aren't necessarily physical barriers, but other issues related to food that are coming out of this. And so what that does, and then we bring everyone back, okay, I guess this is where we do the civic engagement training and for leadership training, because now we're starting to have a story to tell. And so we want the people who live that experience to tell their story if possible. And so we help prepare them for a community conversation that we can co-lead together. So you can go to the next slide. And so that's when we have the community conversation. And so at the community conversation, we kind of, we invite all the stakeholders that we've already met with, and we say, hey, look, these are the results of what you did. But it's also still part of the research process. We gauge community readiness, and we also let the community researchers present their findings, but we ask people what's missing. Are there other barriers that weren't talked about that are really important in this community? Then we use the open space technique where we kind of write down each theme, each barrier or facilitator on a giant white sticky note and put them around the room. And ask people, which of these would you be willing to spend time thinking about a solution for, right? And then we have some conversations around those, and hopefully at the end of the community conversation, we've kind of settled on 1 or 2 themes or barriers, could be facilitators, that we want to focus on creating a solution for. And so the solution to the barrier or something to uplift the facilitator and give more people access to it. And we kind of use that to seed that energy in those individuals to seed a task force, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And so as we're getting the task force organized, what we do is we take all of our findings and we create a final report that has data and information that usually our communities can use to leverage funding. But we also create a story map tool. And so Karima will show you examples of our story maps later in this presentation. Karima and Dan will. But the story map is really a cool GIS Esri online tool that you can use to show both the quantitative, the data, right? This is where people went. These are the things they identified, and kind of embed that narrative story into you. So they can be a powerful tool. And we actually, and Kareem will tell you about, we had a state rep come to one of our meetings who just loved the story map and tweeted it, and that was really cool for us. And so then the final thing, as I alluded to, is we have these task forces, right? And so our third goal, so we have, the goal of building the database, and then we want to understand the lived experience of food insecurity. And to do that, we're also engaging with 12 communities, 4 urban, 4 rural, 4 suburban, to get at that question. But our third goal is really to build local capacity for sustainable food systems transformation, right? How can we equip communities to transform their own food environments, right? And part of that is understanding what the issues are, right? And so that's why we have this database, so you can see the data. We do this participatory mapping approach to bring out that lived experience and highlight that. But then we need to help equip communities to solve these problems. And so we offer a $5,000 seed investment to a community-generated solution. We kind of walk our task forces through a process of kind of responding to an RFP, so to speak, from us, and creating a solution that hopefully will be something that they can use to leverage additional funds to sustain, right? Because we want to build that. But part of building that, and I think you can go to the next slide, part of building that local capacity, it really has to do with these workshops that's on this, right? We did recognize, particularly in the South Side, that some communities need help building that capacity, especially if we're focusing our work in communities that are low income, that have experienced disinvestment, right? And so we can think that, some communities might need help with leadership development. It might be that they have people who are interested, but they don't necessarily have the skills that they need to facilitate sustaining a solution or something like that. And so we have workshops that can help build leaders, and we have what's it called? Leadership Academy that Kerwin has helped and worked with the United Way to build over years in Columbus. And it might be that, we're in a suburban community, for example, that maybe not many people are aware that food insecurity is an issue, right? So how can we help train our task force to educate their community about the issue, right? Because a lot of suburbs actually do have resources that could be leveraged, right? If people understand what the problem is. So how do we do that? Or it could be that, the community needs help writing grants. They have resources, they have people, they have leaders, they don't have that technical skill of grant writing. So how can we help them build that skill so that they can do that? We're also in the process of building partnerships, particularly with Dayton and Cincinnati, hopefully with Cleveland, to hopefully kind of replicate this work. I mean, I have this vision in my head of having this statewide health and food environment database at the neighborhood level, kind of because I'm a nerd. But I think it'd be so cool to have that kind of data at the local level, and be able to really identify what's going on in neighborhoods and what are the needs in neighborhoods. You can go to the next slide. So we are also going to create a toolkit, and that's something actually that Dayton is very interested in using and replicating the modified HEAL maps process. I pretty much said all of that. Yeah, you can go to the next one. I think this is Karima. So if anyone has any questions for me, I would say ask now, or you can ask Karima and Dan at the end. And I'm sorry if I went too fast. I just didn't want to run out of time because I'm teaching.
No, that was perfect. All right, Dan, I believe you are up.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I'm off mute here.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about traditional HEAL maps, kind of going back here. And traditional HEAL maps, as I think Karima mentioned, or Glennon, it's kind of like a needs assessment. But rather than us going in and telling a community that, hey, you're a food desert, it's more letting the community tell us what it's like to live there, what they experience on a day-to-day, regular basis in terms of opportunities to eat healthy or be active or access food. And it is used, as was mentioned earlier, it's developed by Oregon State University. We have used it here in several communities here in Ohio. It is approved as a SNAP-Ed resource. So SNAP-Ed is our is one of the programs that we have. We administer through Extension, provide nutrition education to people that are SNAP eligible. It is a way to measure policy systems and environments and to address them. And finally, it offers a way to measure collective impact. It can really catalyze coalitions and task forces around kind of the built environment and the obesogenic environment. And what's kind of mentioned earlier, sustainability is one of the challenges, I think. So you do the HEAL maps, you have people map out the pictures that sort of capture the environment and the community, and you have a community conversation around these pictures, and then you develop this task force to work on action plans that have been identified, and that's the key, is keeping these task forces sustainable, keeping them strong and high performing and that type of thing. So can we advance slides? And so HEAL Maps is a participatory mapping program. What we do is we work with stakeholders. We identify participant mappers. Oftentimes they're youth, but they can be adults or they can be families. They pick a route in the community. It can be a bus route, bike route, walking route. And along the route, they take pictures of features that they think either support or hinder their abilities to eat healthy and be physically active. And so kind of really looking at the obesogenic environment, what they do is, as mentioned earlier as well, we have a big conversation about the pictures. So we have 5 teams that go out and map, and we come away with like 50 pictures, and then they have to weed out a lot of those pictures and come up with like 20 pictures. And so using those 20 pictures, we work with the mappers to put together a presentation for the community. And then the community has a conversation about the pictures. They talk about whether they think the pictures represent things that support or are barriers to physical activity and healthy eating. They also talk about what they'd like to do in the community, what needs to be done to address some of these things. And so the result is an action plan and a story map that kind of describes the situation. And so typically we use extension educators to facilitate this process, but sometimes it's a community champion as well. So can we go to the next slide? We have about 5 communities in Ohio. Some of these are urban and some of these are rural. Our first was in Lawrence County. We have one did a project in Butler County, one in Ohio. We're working up in Marion right now. And then in Greene County as well. So a little bit more about Extension. We are the link between the communities and people to Ohio State University and the whole land grant system. So we offer evidence-based resources like fact sheets, but we also do programs. We have agriculture and horticulture programs like Master Gardeners. It's an opportunity for communities to engage with land grant faculty and staff. And so I do like to talk about engagement because it's not a top-down type of approach. It's more listening to communities, find out what their needs are, and then bringing resources, evidence-based resources to address those needs. We work in several different program areas, but what might be interest to you on food councils might include, we have faculty that work in community development leadership, nutrition education, and then horticulture and agriculture. And not to mention 4-H as well. So it is a SNAP-Ed approved toolkit. Next slide. It is based also on community readiness. And so communities and organizations are a lot like people. So people go through stages of change when it comes to change in behavior. For example, if I want to quit smoking, I may go through a pre-contemplation stage where I'm not even thinking about it, to a contemplation, realizing, hey, it could impact my quality of life. Maybe there's something I should do about it. Planning stages where, hey, I'm getting ready. I'm trying to figure out how to quit smoking. And then you get to the action where you're just starting to quit, and then maintenance. So communities are very much like this. And they go through these different levels of community change or readiness to change. There's several factors that influence the readiness to change. there may be community efforts out there that are addressing food insecurity. So, for example, a lot of communities have SNAP education within them, but a lot of times people aren't even aware of it or where to sign up for SNAP education. Leadership. Leadership is defined as people who have some sort of influence in the community, and oftentimes it's not the mayor or the county commissioner. Sometimes it's the pastor at a church or the director of a food pantry. And so you have to think about who the leaders are, who has the most influence on the community that you're trying to work with. The community climate's also important to recognize. Attitudes and beliefs about the link between, say, food insecurity and chronic disease. I work a lot with food pantries, and people might not realize that food insecurity has an impact on chronic disease. So if you have chronic disease and you're spending money on insulin and doctor bills, like diabetes, you're spending money on medical supplies and doctor visits, that's going to get into your food budget. So we see people trading off, not getting medicine to pay for food, or buying food and not buying medicine. So we see really, really difficult trade-offs like that. And so food insecurity is impacted by chronic disease, but people might not be aware of that, or they wonder, hey, why is it important for people to eat healthy or get healthy food, have access to healthy food in a community or a food pantry? That kind of ties in with knowledge as well. And then resources. Resources are important so that resources can be directed at creating community change through grants and that type of thing. So HEAL Maps is kind of based on that, and we do ask during these community conversations, we ask questions about, for example, do people understand the link between the environment and, say, obesity? And we get some sort of assessment. We basically stage the communities and understand kind of where they're at. Most of our communities kind of fall into what we call the pre-planning stage. In other words, the community really isn't aware of the problem, or it's something that's just not really high on their radar. And so one of the initial steps here is to get task forces and coalitions to really help the communities become more aware. So I'm going to turn it over to Karima here. I guess I'm talking a little too much.
No, that's perfect. That's a great segue, Dan. Thank you. So yeah, we told you about the two outputs for this community-based participatory research process, or this food mapping in short, and that was the story map and the community report. So Dan was just talking to you about the community readiness theory and how it helps. So yeah, certainly this comes into play when health departments are getting their assessments together. You know, they have to put together the annual CHA and CHIP, the community health assessments and the community health improvement plan. And so, in fact, in Greene County, we had a health department-led coalition that was doing a countywide needs assessment, and the HEAL Maps community report that's going to come out of that, which is kind of in its final stages of editing, is going to help supplement or provide some of the qualitative information for their food insecurity or nutrition section of their needs assessment. So just like Dan said, that coalition building is key. It is a pretty heavy white paper or document. So it's not typically what we disseminate to the community. First of all, we don't want to kill that many trees. And secondly, like I said, it's heavy reading. But where it does also help, in addition to coalition building and assessments, is funding. So this is a great document that helps raise awareness, prove that there is, truly some barriers in the community that can be addressed. This community readiness, you can see on the PowerPoint slide now, this was taken from Butler County's HEAL Maps. When we are having our community conversation, Dan mentioned the polling. What we do is take those polling questions, match them with some of the narrative from the community conversation, and help assign a score. So then we aggregate that data, kind of take the average of all these different dimensions, and then come up with the score. So it's not completely prescriptive. There's certainly some, context that's necessary. So reading the entire report along with the story map is helpful in understanding. And we can, there's a link to this. Actually, I can send this, but I wanted to mention on the front of the story map, we created on this community report, we created a QR code that linked to the story map, and that's more of the community dissemination piece. And if we have time, we will explore one or send out the link either in the chat box or on the recording or an email that Amanda sends after this.
I'm going to share that link for your map right now, Karima.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And yeah, you can, after you share it, you can go to the next slide as well. We also wanted to make sure we left time for Q&A, but yeah, there's kind of a shortened link for that. It's this will take you to the Westchester story map. That was our first modified version that Glennon was telling you about. And this is that tweet she was telling you about. So Margie Condit is a state representative, and we were just so ecstatic that she shared it out. So this just shows that kind of impact that it can have, you know, and here it brought awareness to the community and even attention to what was going on. So so definitely strong. And then the Southside story map as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Southside here in a minute, but this was the modified version of the HEAL maps, and here's a photo of our roundtable here. So we convened in December of last year and talked about these barriers and what we can do to address them. Here I kind of wanted to talk a bit about collective impact. So this is certainly a buzzword in the public health, city planning, social work kind of realm. Some of you may have heard of it, but thought I'd just go over a bit what it means. It was originally I guess it was first written about in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2011 by John Kania and Mark Kramer. And they identified these 5 key elements. And in the graphic here, you can see it's a common agenda. So, you know, everyone on the ship sort of going in the same direction. Common progress measures. So these can be, you know, how many times you've met. It can be, you know, how many members are on your coalition or task force, mutually reinforcing activities that can be you know, how the health department is helping extension, who is helping the food pantry, you know, who is just all those shared tasks reinforces that concept of collective impact. Making sure that you have transparency, so communication, making sure that you are communicating your information in different ways. You know, the concept of a meeting, a working meeting is very much like a middle class, you know, Anglo-Saxon space. So, you know, how do we meet people where they are? And leaders come in all different walks of life, shapes and forms. You know, a leader may be someone who comes to your meeting, or maybe a leader is someone who, you know, is in the barbershop disseminating information on you know, infectious disease, or you know, where you can go and get a free meal on Tuesdays. You know, that's a leader too. And so Glennon talked to you about the principles of equitable, inclusive civic engagement that the Kirwan Institute coined, and embracing the gifts of diversity is one of them. So just I would say with communications, making sure that you are being as accessible as possible. And lastly, the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation, is the backbone organization. So who is taking on the role of managing collaboration? Dan talked about how often in counties is extension, just because of its long-standing presence, its rapport, its relationships, especially in rural communities. You're talking about its foundation in the agricultural realm. So, you know, but maybe it's the health department, maybe it's a faith-based organization. Certainly we know that where social services fall short, our faith-based organizations come to the forefront and help serve our communities, our citizens. So just thought I'd kind of touch on that a bit, collective impact, defining it. Will you go back just a second, Amanda? Sorry. But also, who do you bring to the table? This is going back to, you know, communications a bit. But making sure whoever is in part of your task force, you know, if you did a food mapping project or you have another type of coalition, food councils, you know, being deliberate about who you invite in, but also being inclusive, you know, so nothing stops a food pantry client from sitting on a food council. In fact, that's encouraged. Imagine the type of perspective they're bringing, and you know, also age. You know, nothing wrong with having youth come to the table. You know, whether it's a 4-H club or it's someone from the schools, you know, so thinking about the different types of diversity and ensuring that you have that in your group, whether it's your stakeholders in a task force or your food council members. And lastly, this community action plan. So another buzzword right now is strategic doing, and I'm still learning about it, to be honest, but in short, you know, just as the name alludes to, it's, you know, maybe not just sitting and talking about it, but being about it. You know, often when we create strategic plans, they are 5-10 years out, and certainly, especially in the you know, public health, social work, community work space, things change within 6 months, you know, let alone 6 years. And so just hitting the ground running with something that's working towards your goal is sort of putting the stones down and walking on that path as you build it. So it's another way to think about that. But so our community action plan that comes with HEAL Maps and Feast is in the format of a strategic doing, where you talk about the steps, who's needed, what resources are needed, and you just start going at it. So in fact, on the south side, I'll just talk briefly about that so we can leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. But on the south side of Columbus, we are in our task force phase. And what's really amazing about it is, Dan may have mentioned, but in addition to grounded theory and community readiness theory, we also take in terms of framework, we take an appreciative inquiry approach where, you know, we're not here just to talk about the barriers or, you know, what's bad about your community, but also what's really great. So on the south side of Columbus, what was really great is just the depth and the breadth of resources. So just amazing efforts and community investment. And so it's sort of like a no need to reinvent the wheel, right? Let's just connect the dots and raise awareness. Because one thing that you hear often in Central Ohio and Columbus is, you know, it's resource rich but coordination poor. So you may feel that's the same in your community, especially metro areas. You know, not so much the case in suburban or rural, but urban areas tend to be pretty resource rich. But often your clients, your customers, you know, participants, whatever you call the consumer, is not aware of them. So bringing awareness to them. So on the south side, we found that, you know, although there were barriers in terms of food access, in particular these corner stores that Glennon touched on a bit, and you'll get to read more about in our story map. There were also some of the strengths was the social network. So although, you know, the resources themselves were not well known, definitely the social network, you know, Deandra telling me that, yeah, here are all the places you can get free food, here where all the produce drops occurred, you know, those kinds of social networks help leverage that information in different ways. So maybe it's not on a website, but it's certainly by word of mouth. So again, taking this approach makes your community feel better because they know they can work on their strengths and you're meeting them where they are. We also were able to coordinate. There were some leadership academies in the community. There were some you know, coalitions and area commissions and things like that. And so just, again, bringing that collective impact approach and like, hey, let's join efforts here. There's a lot of great things going on. Let's not duplicate our efforts and try to forge forward together. So that's on the ground what it looks like. That's where a lot of my involvement is. I do a lot of the data collection and data analysis, but my favorite part is actually being on the ground and working with the community. So. And with that, our last slide here, one of our favorite quotes, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's Margaret Mead there. So yeah, that is it. That's our contact info. I guess we're going to open up the mics and chat boxes now for Q&A, but we'd love to hear your thoughts, your experience in the communities, and any other feedback you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Karima. Thanks, Dan, if you're still on the line. So I have the chat box open.
I'm here.
So we'll give people a minute or two to maybe enter some questions they might have related to the talk or anything else for HEAL Maps.
Curious if anyone has done food mapping in their community or they've had it done.
Karima, maybe we can use this time to chat a little bit about when you do choose a community to work in, what is the timeline for getting a project started? How many months or weeks is there in terms of planning with partners prior to launching a Heal Map project?
Yeah, good question. And I'll let Dan kind of add into this too. But the first step is really identifying your community partner, because they're going to be your sustainability component. So maybe it's extension, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a health department. And once you've identified them, then you can work to recruit your community researchers. So that typically happens a couple months before you start the actual food mapping. But the entire process can be 8 to 12 weeks long. So you're looking at, 3 to 4 months of just the process. If you wanted to do, like the quick and dirty that Glennon was talking about, what really takes a while, and some of you may be able to speak to this, is that coalition building, that task force development. So getting the skills, getting the sense of empowerment in your local citizens on how we can make this happen. But I'd say within a year, you can get a really solid feast or Heal Maps process in, along with the task force creation and development. So, but the Heal Maps curriculum, as it was written at Oregon State University, is 12 weeks. Dan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you did a good job there describing the length and.
So we have one question in the chat box. It says, what do you recommend to recent college graduates who want to work in food justice or food security? What kind of entry-level jobs exist in this field?
Good question.
I would say, from personal experience, just to throw this in there, that there's a lot of great opportunities through AmeriCorps that are related to food security that provide really great experience on the ground.
Agreed.
Food Corps is I would say extension work is, there's extension positions that become open all throughout the state, and so that's an opportunity. We have one extension educator who has a background in social work who we're working with right now on Heal Map. So there's a lot of backgrounds that, I think that a lot of educational backgrounds that can be helpful. And, you don't need to have a public health degree. You can have a work degree and still do work in this area. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Extension, your local universities. It's starting to pop up. The city of Columbus just hired a food systems planner, which is, the first time ever. So it's slowly starting to bubble up, but, see if there's a food council in your community, start to plug in, chat with, who is on the food council, ask them for opportunities. But, if you email us your location, I can try to connect as well. And I can ask out. Also email the OFPN listserv, and you might be able to find some opportunities.
There's 2 other questions that were submitted through the chat box. The first is, how can we get involved with expanding the mapping project in their communities? And I'm not sure if that person is in an area like Columbus or a site maybe where you've already done some mapping. I'm kind of assuming that, but if you want to address that.
Yeah, Amy Holler, did you, I don't know if you can indicate if you had a mapping project already or you would like to have a mapping project. Oh, you're in Cincinnati. Oh, that's my old stomping grounds. So okay, from what I know, there's not been a formal Heal Maps process like what Dan and I do, or a feast process like Glennon and I do. That's in the works with Dr. Alan White. I don't know if you know him. I see Michaela on the call. I know Michaela knows Alan, but he is a professor at the Christ College of Nursing and runs she knows him, runs their service learning program. But I work with Alan. Actually, I used to work with him at Gorman Heritage Farm when I was a farm educator there. But he has done some food mapping. It is, Oh, awesome. Cool. Michaela says Alan and she are talking about Heal Maps after this webinar. Cool. So hit us up. Let us know what help you need. But he has done food mapping in a really awesome, simplified way. It's very participatory, but it's like get a notebook, get out on the streets. He's used a falling fruit approach to identify edible landscapes as well. But and I will say his maps are really pretty. If you haven't seen Alan's, you can Google them. But I know he's done Camp Washington. He's done Madisonville. He takes kind of like an old school approach to it, but I love it. So he's working on a regional, for the state of Ohio, a regional food systems history, and is putting that together. So keep an eye out for that. We'll send it out to the listserv. But yeah, I would, if you know Alan, he's the one who's kind of pioneered the food mapping work in Cincinnati. So thank you, Amy.
There's one other question so far. It says, with your mapping process, have you included any transportation conversations with local agencies to connect people to fresh food?
I think that organically just kind of comes up during the community conversations. I'm just thinking about our Butler County project where we worked with a low-income housing complex embedded within like a Westchester, which is just north of Cincinnati. A lot of transportation options for people in those communities. In fact, there aren't any sidewalks. So there were some discussions about connecting with, trying to improve transportation.
Yeah, and then on the south side, this was just, we had a state task force meeting Tuesday. There used to be a veggie van in Columbus between 2010 and 2013, and it lost funding, and there were some sustainability issues, but there's a veggie van study that's going on right now. I think there's an RFP out if anyone is interested in Googling veggie van study and applying, but looks like Local Matters, one of our community partners is interested in applying for that, but that's, they take a CSA / pop-up mobile market approach. So yeah, there are some, definitely comes up for sure. And there are some ideas or community-based solutions that have popped up dependent. It's just every community is different, like Dan said. Sometimes it's sidewalks, sometimes it's actual availability and access to.
So Tom asked, do you have more information about the veggie van RFP?
Yeah, if you are going to email out, Amanda, do you want to send the link? I can, okay. Okay, cool. I'll actually try to put it in the chat box and you let me know if it opens up. I was able to pull it up because luckily it was, okay, let's see, all panelists and attendees. Let me know if you get this, Tom. But that's the RFP. It's due Monday. Good luck. Okay. Cool.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Dan and Karima? Give another 30 seconds or so, and if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. All right, I will take the silence as that we have no more questions. So thank you so much, Dan, Karima, and make sure to tell Glenn and I said thank you for hosting this. This was a really great webinar, and I hope that lots of people who joined today will engage with you guys in the HEAL Map process. Again, this will be recorded, and I'll place it on the website and through the listserv for people to revisit. So you'll have the contact information, and I'll also follow up with the slides and the veggie van link. And then we hope to see you all Monday for the Ohio Food Policy Network Summit. So hopefully we'll see you in Columbus on Monday. And have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks to Carol too for hosting.
Thanks, Carol.
Well, thanks to Dan.
All right, bye, everyone.
You guys.
Bye.